And now we're on to chapter 3. Agnes turned away from Henrietta as if she was too scared to see if there was disgust or horror in her eyes. She simply would not be able to cope if the only person in her afterlife found her abhorrent. But there was no disgust or horror in Henrietta's eyes. She was neither clutching the cross on her necklace in contempt nor planning to whack the sin out of her with a Bible as most people would have done. Instead, she simply breathed deeply and let Agnes's tide of courage wash over her. "Agnes," she said, "I like girls too." Agnes's head lifted, and though tear marks were evident on her cheeks, she smiled, and Henrietta smiled back. She had finally found someone else like her, and even in death she was grateful for that privilege. After that day they became even closer, one might say inseparable, if they weren't separated by the thin veil between life and death which they were reminded of each time they desired to hold the other's hand, or wished to know what it was like to kiss them. It was painful, but worthwhile, as all love is. Their romance grew, as did the pumpkins from the seeds Henrietta sowed on the first day of meeting Agnes. They began to learn more about each other and shared other secrets that they had locked away inside themselves, along with their sexual preferences. Henrietta revealed that she and her childhood best friend Nathaniel used to swap clothes. She would pretend to be a man, and he would pretend to be a lady. He worked in a dressmaker's shop while she owned and managed a farm. Agnes confessed that since baking cakes and pies with her mother as a child, she had a dream of one day owning a bakery, if they had allowed women to do such a thing when she was alive. Henrietta shared her grief that stemmed from her Nathaniel's death in the Civil War, and her parents' recent deaths from cholera. Agnes divulged that she sorely missed the taste of food, and wished she knew what became of her mother and father when they left the farm after her death. Henrietta and Agnes may not have had much, particularly when considering that Agnes did not even have a corporeal body, but they had each other, and that was enough for the both of them. They leaned on one another and kept each other strong. Henrietta swore to master the art of baking for Agnes, and Agnes promised if she made it to heaven one day, she would tell Henrietta's parents and Nathaniel how much she loved them for her. They truly made each other the happiest that they had been before, the happiest they had ever been before. Though they could not physically touch, they did so emotionally. They held each other's hearts and never wanted to let go. Henrietta's attempts at baking began miserably, as all hobbies do. Agnes hovered in her kitchen as she taught Henrietta the secrets that were passed down by her grandmother to her mother to her. Though Henrietta had hoped to use the pumpkins she grew herself to make pumpkin pie, Agnes believed that it would be easier to start off with apple for her first pie. As Agnes was bound by heaven and hell to the farm, she could not leave it, so Henrietta went to the farmer's market alone to collect ingredients. She only went into the village for necessities. Even the buyers of her produce came to the farm. Henrietta no longer liked going to the village after knowing what happened to Agnes. She also knew that the villagers mocked her viciously for being an unmarried, reclusive female property owner. They called her a spinster and told her she would die like she lived, alone. When she was out in public, all she wished was to be back on the farm with Agnes. She did not care that they called her crazy. She was happy. Distracted by her anxieties, Henrietta panicked and bought all the ingredients quickly. It wasn't until she emptied the bag did she realise what she did. She not only grabbed the wrong ingredients, but she also forgot to buy apples. A part of Agnes thought it was a ruse by Henrietta to get her own way and make a pumpkin pie, but believed Henrietta's apology for being so distracted and absent-minded. Agnes had never made a pumpkin pie while she was alive, but she does fondly remember watching her mother make them for Thanksgiving dinner. So she guided Henrietta carefully through the process, watching her every move over her shoulder. But when Agnes wasn't looking, Henrietta quickly grounded up pumpkin seeds and threw them into the bowl of spice. As they waited for the pumpkin pie to be finished, they traded Thanksgiving memories and favourite dishes. Agnes's was the turkey, which was killed and prepared days in advance, while Henrietta's was the dessert, but she still had trouble deciding between sweet potato pie or pumpkin. They both agreed that the pie cooling on the counter would be the deciding vote. "It smells good," said Henrietta after getting a good whiff of the pie. "How do I know if it's done?" "My mother used to say it should jiggle like gelatin, not wiggle like a wave," replied Agnes, chuckling. Henrietta slowly cut into the pie, wary of whether she over or undercooked it. It looked dense enough and seemed smooth, and Agnes approved of the aesthetic quality of Henrietta's first pie. Now it was all about the taste. She raised the fork with the first chunk of pie on it and lifted it to her mouth. She closed her eyes and savoured it. Agnes would have been waiting with bated breath if she breathed for the results of their labours. If she still breathed for the results of their labours. Henrietta smiled. Her pie was good. They celebrated together. Henrietta wolfed down her slice and declared pumpkin pie far superior to sweet potato. She looked to Agnes, who was appearing rather melancholy, despite the fact that her baking protégé had finally succeeded. "What's wrong?" Henrietta asked. Agnes sighed. "I just wish I could taste it." Henrietta pondered as she watched Agnes grow sadder and sadder, while the pumpkin pie's sweet and warming smell only grew. "I don't know if it's true or not," began Henrietta, "but I did hear from my pastor that ghosts could possess the living. Could you try that?" "And who would I possess?" she said, snapping. "Some villager?" "I meant me," said Henrietta meekly. "Oh," she said. Agnes thought about it for a moment and realised she had nothing to lose. Okay? Yes, let's try it." It was an incredibly uncomfortable experience. Agnes had to shove her soul inside of Henrietta's body. It was like trying to herd two cows through one tiny gate. There was not enough space, and ever so awkward. Agnes's soul wiggled around until it got accustomed to becoming physical and corporeal again. She knew it had worked as soon as the rich aroma of pie hit her nostrils. Agnes could still feel Henrietta. Her soul was not gone or asleep. Instead, it was like she was hovering over her shoulder and watching her every move. Agnes walked to the table where the still steaming pumpkin pie sat, taking joy in every step she took after the many years unable to feel anything. She sat down on the wooden stool and picked up the knife to cut herself the biggest slice she could. She looked at it on her plate and examined everything about it, its textures, its smoothness, the way it jiggles, the way the crust crumbles. It was overwhelming. She took her fork and tore up the pie. She lifted it to her lips, which curled around the fork delicately and enveloped the piece of pie lovingly. It was absolutely exquisite. It was fruity and sweet, and the spices kicked at Agnes's taste buds. It was just so wonderfully rich and luscious. And like Henrietta did, Agnes scarfed down the slice as quickly as she could, then cut herself another one. The feeling of warmth that came from the heavenly pie spread over Agnes like a blanket, and even reached Henrietta, who was experiencing all of this second-hand. She felt the rushes of pure joy coming from Agnes, and in that moment they were so immensely content. End of chapter 3.